My graduation day ended with two gifts. My twin sister got a trip to Europe, while I received a $10 gift card. They called it a small token of encouragement because I was so good at being independent. I slipped the card into my pocket, thinking it was just a private humiliation. I never imagined the string of numbers on the back would unravel a dirty trail within the company I was about to join, and ignite a corporate takedown that would silence my entire family. My name is Ava Merritt, and at 27, I was finally getting my degree. The ceremony at Greybridge Academy was exactly as mundane as I'd anticipated. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp, overmown grass, and the humidity made the black polyester of my gown cling unpleasantly to my skin. From the crackling loudspeakers perched on flimsy metal stands, a dean with a monotone voice droned on about futures and potentials, his words dissolving into the vast, indifferent sky. Around me, a sea of identical square caps bobbed, a uniform of achievement that felt more like a costume. Families, clustered in designated sections of the lawn, would periodically erupt into cheers as a name was called, their shouts a brief, sharp punctuation in the long, drawn-out sentence of the proceedings. Then there was Nora. My twin sister arrived, as always, fashionably late. She didn't have a degree to collect, but she was dressed for a celebration. Her celebration, it seemed, a simple white sundress, hair catching the weak morning light like spun gold, and a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. She slipped into the folding chair beside my mother, squeezing my father's arm and whispering something that made him laugh. She was a magnetic north. The family's compass always swung to face her. I watched them from my alphabetical seat among the M's, a silent observer in my own life's milestone. When the last diploma was handed out, and the air filled with the rustle of programs and the pop of confetti cannons, I was enveloped by my family. But it wasn't a hug of shared victory. It was a gravitational pull towards Nora, my father, a man who curated life for the perfect photograph, guided her to a spot where the sun broke through the clouds, creating a natural spotlight. "We have something for you, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice brimming with a practiced, theatrical warmth. She produced a rectangular box wrapped in shimmering silver paper. Nora's gasp was perfect, a delicate, airy sound. She unwrapped it with care, revealing a handsome navy blue portfolio. Embossed in gold leaf on the cover were two words, Bon Voyage. Inside was a meticulously planned 4-week tour of Europe. Round trip, business class tickets to Paris, a detailed itinerary covering Florence, Rome, Barcelona, and Amsterdam, vouchers for boutique hotels, museum passes, reservations at restaurants I'd only read about. It was a life, packaged and presented, a grand narrative. Nora held the portfolio to her chest, her eyes shining with unshed, cinematic tears. "Oh, you shouldn't have," she breathed. The line delivered with an actress's precision. "You've had such a trying year with the gallery project," Dad said, patting her shoulder. "You deserve to find your inspiration again." Then, my mother turned to me. The shift in her energy was palpable, like a light dimming. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, plain white envelope. It was thin, almost weightless. It had my name on it, written in her neat, impersonal script. "And for you, Ava," she said, her smile becoming smaller, more practical. "We know how you are." I took the envelope. There was no box, no ribbon. Inside, a single piece of plastic was taped to a generic greeting card that said, "Congratulations on your big day." It was a $10 gift card for the Daily Grind, the in-house coffee chain at Halcyon Dynamics, the place I was due to start my new job as a compliance analyst in 2 weeks. My graduation gift was a corporate perk, a rounding error in an employee benefits budget. "You're so practical, Ava," my mother explained to the air, her gaze already drifting back to Nora's glowing face. "You don't need grand gestures to be happy. We thought this would be useful." The word hung there. Useful. My sister got a continent. I got a beverage. She turned her attention fully back to Nora, her voice regaining its warmth. "Remember to get lots of pictures in Florence, darling, especially from the Uffizi." I stood there, holding the flimsy card, the smell of coffee and corporate synergy practically wafting off it. A smile was fixed on my face, a mask of polite gratitude I had perfected over a lifetime of such moments. It was a complex muscular arrangement, holding back a flood of questions that threatened to choke me, the most pressing of which was a quiet, searing inquiry. What happened to my half of the college fund? The fund our grandparents had established for both of us, the one that had been mysteriously depleted by a series of emergencies over the years, all of them Nora's, her acting classes in New York, her creative retreat in a Californian vineyard, her summer painting course in Provence. Each one chipped away at my future while I worked 2 jobs, applied for every scholarship under the sun, and ate ramen noodles until the salt made my tongue feel numb. My parents called it a lesson in self-reliance. "It's a gift, really, Ava," my father had told me once. "You're learning to stand on your own 2 feet. Apparently, Nora's feet required the well-trodden soil of Western Europe. Nora, still basking in the glow of her grand tour, leaned her head on our mother's shoulder. She glanced at the small plastic card in my hand and gave a little, tinkling laugh. "Ava loves her data," she said, her tone light and teasing, but with an edge of condescension as sharp as glass. "She'll probably enter that $10 into a spreadsheet and calculate its happiness ROI. My father chuckled. "That's our Ava, always finding the patterns." I looked down at the card again, the confetti from the ceremony settling on my shoulders like colorful ash. They were right about one thing. I did see patterns, and as my family fussed over Nora's itinerary, my eyes focused on the back of the card. Below the magnetic strip was a long string of alphanumeric characters. It wasn't a standard gift card number, it was a code, formatted in a specific sequence I recognized from my onboarding documents. It was the internal tracking format Halcyon Dynamics used for its corporate expense and intracompany accounting systems. A number meant to be processed, not just spent. A cold clarity washed over me, cutting through the hot sting of humiliation. I slipped the card into the pocket of my gown, the cheap plastic cool against my skin. Then I slid it into my wallet, placing it carefully in a slot next to my new corporate ID. This pathetic $10 gift hadn't just been an insult, it was an education. It had just taught me 2 profound lessons. The first was that my family did not consider me important enough for a real gift, a real acknowledgement. In the grand family narrative, I was a supporting character, the reliable, low-maintenance one who didn't need a spotlight. The second, and far more critical lesson, was that it was now my job to make them, and everyone else, rethink that assessment. The $10 wasn't a gift, it was a key, and I, the practical one, the one who loved data, was about to find the lock it was made for. The Merritt family home in Corbin Falls was a gallery of pleasant fictions. Along the main hallway, a curated collection of silver-framed photographs chronicled a life of effortless happiness. There was the photo of us as children on a sailboat, the wind artfully catching Nora's blonde hair while I, ever practical, held onto the railing with both hands. There was the shot from a charity gala, my parents looking regal, Nora, a socialite in training, on my father's arm. In every frame, we were perfectly posed, perfectly lit. The image of suburban success. What the pictures never showed were the cracks in the plaster, the arguments behind closed doors, or the quiet, systematic erosion of my place within the frame. In the mythology of our family, Nora was cast as the sunshine. She was the creative force, the free spirit, the one whose emotions were vibrant, important, and worthy of constant accommodation. I was cast as the cool head. It was presented as a compliment, a testament to my stability and intelligence, but it was really a life sentence. A cool head is expected to absorb pressure without complaint. A cool head doesn't need reassurance or grand gestures. A cool head can, and should, take care of itself. The roles were assigned early and we played them to perfection. Nora would have a dramatic, soul-crushing breakup, and the family would rally. Funding a weekend spa trip for her to heal, I would get a top score on a competitive exam, and my parents would nod, satisfied. "Of course you did, Ava," my father would say. "That's what you do." My successes were treated as foregone conclusions, while Nora's whims were treated as artistic emergencies. Nowhere was this dynamic more devastatingly clear than with our shared college fund. It had been a generous gift from our grandparents, intended to be split equally, a foundation for both our futures. But that foundation became Nora's personal slush fund. It began the summer after high school. Nora decided, with the sudden, feverish conviction she was famous for, that her true calling was acting. An essential 6-week intensive in New York was discovered. I remember the family meeting, which was less a meeting and more a royal decree. "It's a significant withdrawal," my father had said, tapping a pen on the account statement. "But you can't put a price on a dream." I, who had just spent the summer bussing tables to save for my own textbooks, asked a quiet question. "Does this come out of her half?" My mother gave me a look of gentle disappointment. "Ava, don't be so transactional. We're a family. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed. Besides, you have that scholarship for your first year. You're already on your way." The bleeding continued. A year later, Nora's acting dream had faded, replaced by a passion for sculpting. This required a creative residency in a charming little town in the Berkshires, another withdrawal. Then came the year she felt creatively stifled and needed to find herself through a summer painting course in Provence. The pictures she sent back were stunning. Nora in a lavender field, Nora looking thoughtfully at the Pont du Gard, Nora sipping wine at a cafe where Van Gogh had supposedly sat. Each photo was a perfectly composed scene of artistic discovery, funded by what was left of my education. While she was finding herself in Europe, I was finding myself in the university's 24-hour library, fueled by vending machine coffee and the quiet terror of my student loans. I worked as a research assistant, a barista, and a tutor. I applied for so many grants and scholarships that I could recite my personal essays in my sleep. When I managed to secure a prestigious grant that would cover my entire final year, my parents were pleased, but in a distant, unsurprised way. "See," my father said, as if this had been his plan all along. "We knew you could do it. Self-reliance is a privilege. Ava, it builds character." It was the ultimate gaslight. They had not given me a privilege. They had abdicated their responsibility and repackaged it as a virtue. They had taken my foundation and used it to build Nora a stage, then applauded me for learning to build my own house, brick by painful brick. But their neglect taught me something invaluable. In the absence of their support, I developed a different kind of skill. I became a meticulous archivist of my own life. While Nora was collecting experiences, I was collecting data. I started a private ledger, a simple spreadsheet on my laptop. In it, I recorded the date of every withdrawal from the fund, the amount, the stated purpose. I made notes of the conversations, the exact phrasing they used to justify the inequity. Nora needs this for her portfolio. It's an investment in her future. "You're so capable, Ava. You'll be fine." Who signed the withdrawal slip? Who smiled when they told me? It wasn't about bitterness. It was about clarity. It was about creating a record of the truth that their silver-framed photographs worked so hard to conceal. Our family gatherings became stage rehearsals for a play in which Nora was the perpetual star. She would hold court at the dinner table, recounting her latest adventures with dramatic flair, while my parents hung on her every word. My own life, with its steady, methodical progress, was treated as the boring but necessary work of a stagehand. Any attempt I made to share a success was met with a brief, polite nod, before the conversation was skillfully steered back to Nora's more compelling narrative. I learned to stop trying. I learned to simply watch, to listen, and to record. I used to believe justice was a matter of morality, a story like the ones in books where good eventually triumphs over selfishness. Living in the Merritt family taught me that was a childish fantasy. Real justice wasn't a feeling or a moral outcome. Justice was colder, harder, more empirical. Justice was evidence. It was a signed document placed in the right hands. It was a damning email presented in the right meeting. It was an audit trail that could not be denied. Justice wasn't about changing hearts. It was about creating consequences through irrefutable facts. And that $10 gift card for my graduation, sitting now on the desk in my small, new apartment, felt different. The city of Northwick was quiet outside my window. The life I had built for myself was about to begin. The card was no longer just a symbol of their disregard. It was tangible. It was a data point, a starting block, that ridiculous piece of corporate plastic, with its long coded number on the back, was the first official entry in a new kind of ledger. It was, funnily enough, the first piece of hard evidence. The $10 gift card sat on my desk like a tombstone for my old life. For 2 weeks, I let it lie there, a constant, quiet reminder of the role I was expected to play. It was a clue, yes, a thread I intended to pull once I was inside the walls of Halcyon Dynamics. But it felt small, a long game for a wound that felt immediate. My family had built their entire world on a foundation of appearances, and I knew that a slow, quiet corporate investigation might not be enough to shake it. Justice, as I now understood it, required leverage, real leverage. And the most significant piece of the Merritt family's carefully constructed image was the house at 14 Juniper Court in Glenford Springs. The house was my father's masterpiece, a sprawling colonial with pristine white siding, perfectly manicured gardens, and a grand oak tree in the front yard. It was the backdrop for all those silver-framed photographs, the stage upon which the fiction of our perfect life was performed. It was also their single greatest asset and, I suspected, their greatest vulnerability. My parents weren't truly wealthy. They were experts at projecting the illusion of wealth, an illusion that required constant, expensive maintenance. Driven by a cold, burgeoning curiosity, I turned to the skills I had spent years honing: research and data analysis. The Glenford Springs County Clerk's Office maintained a public online database of all property records, a place of unvarnished facts. I poured a cup of black coffee, sat at my laptop, and began to dig. The first mortgage was standard, taken out with a major national bank when they bought the house 20 years ago. But then I found it, a second filing, dated 3 years prior, a subordinate lien against the property, a second mortgage. It was the financial equivalent of a hairline crack in a load-bearing wall. People who are financially secure do not take out high-interest second mortgages on their homes. People who are desperate do. I downloaded the documents, my screen glowing in the dark of my small apartment. The details made the picture even clearer and far more precarious. It was an adjustable-rate mortgage, and the initial low-interest period was set to expire. Next month, the interest rate would jump from a manageable 4% to a punishing 11%. I cross-referenced the payment terms with the lien information. The fine print was a death sentence, a 30-day grace period for late payments, after which the lender had the immediate right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. One missed payment, just one, and the entire house of cards would come tumbling down. The knife needed one final twist to be perfect. I scrolled to find the name of the lender, the entity that held this power over my family. It wasn't a bank. It was a small, private investment fund with a chillingly familiar name, Halcyon Ridge Capital. A quick search confirmed my suspicions. They weren't in the business of lending. They were in the business of debt. They specialized in buying up distressed assets, mortgages on the verge of default, unpaid loans, the financial wreckage of other people's lives, for pennies on the dollar, and then ruthlessly collecting. They were vultures, and my parents' beautiful home was the carcass they were circling. My heart wasn't pounding, my breathing was even. A strange, surgical calm settled over me. The path forward was no longer theoretical. It was a clear, executable plan. The next morning, I made an appointment with an independent commercial lawyer, a woman with a small, discreet office far from my family's social circles. I paid for the consultation in cash. I didn't give her the backstory. I didn't speak of family or betrayal. I presented it as a hypothetical business inquiry. "I'm looking at a piece of distressed debt," I said, sliding a printout of the mortgage abstract across her desk. "A second lien on a residential property held by a private fund. My question is purely procedural. If I were to purchase that debt from the fund, would I then become the mortgage holder, with all the rights and privileges thereof?" The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, studied the document, her expression unreadable. "You would," she said finally, looking up at me over her glasses. "You'd own the note. You could initiate foreclosure. You could offer a modification. You could forgive it entirely. It would be your asset to manage as you see fit." She paused. "That's assuming they're willing to sell it to you, and you'd need the capital to make the acquisition. An entity like this will only deal with a cash buyer, or more likely, a corporate entity, an LLC." That was the key I needed. An LLC, a limited liability company, a corporate shield, a way to become someone else entirely. That afternoon, I filed the paperwork online to create Juniper North LLC. The name was a private, bitter joke, a nod to the home on Juniper Court that I was about to hold in my grasp. I paid for a registered agent service and a private mail forwarding address in a different state. On paper, Juniper North LLC had no connection to Ava Merritt. It was a ghost, an anonymous entity with a bank account and a singular purpose. I transferred the bulk of my savings, the money I had painstakingly earned and invested from years of scholarships and part-time jobs, into the LLC's new account. It was a sum that represented my entire independent life. With the corporate entity established and funded, I opened a new, encrypted email account. I composed a message to the general acquisitions address listed on Halcyon Ridge Capital's sparse website. The message was one line. To Acquisitions at Halcyon Ridge Cap. Come from Director at Juniper North. Subject: Inquiry Note HR 7781, 14 Juniper Court. We are interested in acquiring the above-referenced debt. Please advise if you are open to a sale and, if so, at what price. I hit send. There was no emotion, no flourish. It was a transaction. The wait was agonizing. For 3 days, I went through the motions of preparing for my new job, my mind constantly elsewhere. I expected a lengthy negotiation, a series of questions, a demand for financial disclosures. What I got was an email back on the third day that was as brutally efficient as my own. To Director at Juniper North, LLC, from Acquisitions at Halcyon Ridge Cap. Com. Subject: Inquiry. Note HR 7781, 14 Juniper Court. Our position on that asset is 62 cents on the dollar, non-negotiable. Requires a 10% deposit within 48 hours to hold, with closing to occur within 5 business days. Wire instructions attached. Let us know. 62% of the face value. They were willing to take a nearly 40% loss just to offload the risk. That told me everything I needed to know about how close to default my parents really were. They were shedding the asset before it became a legal headache. I opened the wire instruction PDF. I logged into the new bank account for Juniper North LLC. I stared at the numbers on the screen, the culmination of my own blood, sweat, and discipline. This was the money that was supposed to be my down payment on a small condo, my safety net, my future. Now, it was being repurposed. It was becoming a weapon. I initiated the wire transfer for the deposit. My hand on the mouse was perfectly steady. There was no tremor of doubt, no wave of regret. This wasn't an act of fiery, screaming rage. This was something colder, quieter, and far more permanent. This was revenge not as a shout, but as a signature on a contract. The house my parents had chosen over me, the symbol of the life from which I had been quietly excluded, was about to become my property. The Halcyon Dynamics Tower was a shard of glass and steel piercing the Northwick sky. It was a structure designed to intimidate, to project an aura of untouchable power. The lobby was a cavern of polished gray stone, so vast and silent that the sound of my sensible heels echoed like gunshots. to enter the building's inner sanctum. You had to pass through a series of sleek, metallic turnstiles that scanned your ID badge with an impersonal green light. It felt less like a workplace and more like a border crossing into a new, sovereign nation, one with its own laws, its own economy, and its own secrets. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My new home was on the 32nd floor, the Department of Data Integrity and Compliance. The name itself felt like a validation of my entire existence. This was a place where precision mattered, where the rules were not subjective, and where every number was expected to add up. The space was open plan and minimalist, all white desks and ergonomic chairs, the quiet hum of servers a constant backdrop to the soft clicking of keyboards. My director was a man named Rowan Kincaid. He was in his late 40s, tall and spare, with a demeanor so quiet he seemed to absorb the sound around him. He didn't greet me with the forced enthusiasm of a corporate manager. He simply shook my hand, his grip firm and dry, and looked at me with eyes that were startlingly perceptive. They were the eyes of a man who missed nothing. "Ava Merritt," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Welcome. Your station is over there. Get acquainted with the systems. Our job is simple. We trust the data, not the people. The data tells us the truth, the people, less often." That was the extent of my orientation. It was perfect. My role was specific: to analyze anomalies in internal corporate spending and to identify and control for fraud within the company's massive employee benefits ecosystem. Halcyon Dynamics was famous for its perks, which were all managed through a complex, proprietary software system called PerkPath. It was the digital lifeblood of the company's culture. PerkPath handled everything from the reloadable cards for the in-house coffee shops to the booking of corporate taxis, from the expensing of client dinners to the distribution of employee gifts and event sponsorships. It was a closed economic loop, a multi-million-dollar system designed to keep employees happy, motivated, and inside the Halcyon ecosystem. It was also, I knew, a potential goldmine for anyone looking to exploit a loophole. I spent the morning reading through the technical manuals, my mind easily absorbing the flowcharts and database architecture. The system was beautifully logical, a vast, interconnected web of transactions, each one time-stamped, coded, and logged. By lunchtime, I was ready to start running some basic queries, just to get a feel for the interface. The training module suggested using dummy data, but that felt pointless. To understand a system, you needed to test it with a real number. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the $10 gift card from my graduation. It felt smaller here, in this temple of high finance, a cheap, plastic relic from another world, but the number on the back was real data, a string of characters that had been generated and logged by this very system. With a sense of detached curiosity, I typed the long alphanumeric code into the transaction lookup field of the PerkPath dashboard. I hit enter, expecting to see a simple result. Card value, $1,000. Status, active, issued by HR department. That was not what appeared on my screen. A detailed transaction record populated the fields, and the information sent a jolt through my system. A sudden, powerful surge of adrenaline. Card ID, 98, GSP 774B, Merit, 01. Value, $10,000. Issuing program, guest of sponsor. Initiative funding source, Public Relations External Outreach Fund, ACCT, PRE 9021. Associated entity, the Merit Family Initiative. Status, active. My breath caught in my throat. I read the lines again, my mind racing to process the implications. Guest of sponsor initiative, not an employee perk. This was a program for external partners, for clients, for dignitaries, and the funding source wasn't human resources. It was the Public Relations Fund, a budget notoriously difficult to audit. But it was the last line that made my blood run cold. Associated entity, the Merit Family Initiative. My name, my family's name, embedded in the corporate architecture of Halcyon Dynamics like a virus. We weren't employees, we weren't clients, yet here we were, listed as an entity, a sponsor, linked to the distribution of company funds. A dozen puzzle pieces that had been scattered in my mind for years suddenly slammed together. The vague mentions of my father's community outreach, my mother's charity work, the way they always managed to secure tables at exclusive corporate-sponsored galas. They weren't just attending, they were somehow a part of the machinery. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. This cheap, insulting gift was not a gift at all. It was a product of their own scheme, a piece of corporate largesse they had somehow funneled and then passed off to me as a personal thought. The humiliation I'd felt on graduation day curdled into something else entirely, a sharp, exhilarating fury. This was a pattern, this was a system, and I had just found the first loose thread. My training, the methodical discipline I had cultivated my entire life, took over. I pushed the emotion down, converting it into cold, focused action. I took a full resolution screenshot of the PerkPath window. I opened a text editor and typed out the card ID and the PR fund account number. I ran a new query on the batch code, GSP 7074B, and discovered that 200 cards had been issued under that same code 2 days before my graduation. I saved the results to a secure, encrypted file on my local drive, naming it Case File 1. A small, tight smile played on my lips, one I quickly suppressed. It was in that moment that Rowan Kincaid materialized beside my desk, moving with his characteristic silence. I flinched, my hand instinctively moving to shield the screen. But it was too late. He had already glanced over. He didn't ask what I was looking at. His sharp eyes simply took in the dense data on my monitor, my rigid posture, the fierce concentration on my face. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Document everything," he said, his low voice cutting through the office hum. He started to walk away, then paused and looked back at me. "Merit," he added, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes the biggest fires start with the smallest receipts." He turned and walked toward his glass-walled office, leaving me staring at my screen. He had no idea what he was looking at, no idea of the personal earthquake that had just happened on my desktop, but he had seen a rookie analyst pulling on a thread, and he hadn't told me to stop. He had told me to keep records. In that moment, I knew I had found more than just a job. I had found the perfect place to execute a new one. I was no longer just a compliance analyst. I was the auditor of the Merit Family Initiative, and the audit was officially underway. Rowan Kincaid's words were a license to hunt. The rest of the day, I performed the mundane tasks of a new employee, but my mind was a whirlwind of queries and connections. As soon as the office emptied, the real work began. Under the dim, humming lights of the 32nd floor, I dove into the Halcyon Dynamics databases with a singular, focused mission: to unravel the Merit Family Initiative. My access as a compliance analyst was extensive. I started by isolating every transaction associated with that entity. The picture that emerged was, on the surface, perfectly benign. Over the past 3 years, the initiative had been the conduit for dozens of small-batch gift card issuances, all funded by the PR department. The official justifications were neatly recorded. Sponsorship for the Corbin Falls Charity Bake Sale. Goodwill tokens for the Northwick Library fundraiser. Community partner appreciation. It was a carefully constructed facade of corporate citizenship, a trail of digital breadcrumbs designed to lead nowhere. But I wasn't interested in where the trail was supposed to lead. I was interested in its flaws. I shifted my focus from issuance to redemption. Pulling the activation data for every single card the initiative had ever sponsored, I wrote a script to parse and visualize the data, mapping the time and location of every transaction, and then I saw it, a glaring, statistically impossible anomaly. While most of the cards were redeemed sporadically across dozens of vendors and locations, a significant cluster, nearly 30%, had been activated at a single point of sale: the daily grind on the ground floor of the Halcyon Tower. More telling was the timestamp. These activations consistently occurred between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., a dead hour after the cleaning crews had left, but before the first wave of employees arrived for the day. It was a pattern of behavior that made no sense for legitimate community members. It was the pattern of someone with early, easy access to the building, systematically liquidating the cards into cash-equivalent purchases before anyone was there to notice. The next question was the most important. Where did the money come from? The gift cards were paid for by the PR External Outreach Fund, but who was putting money into that fund to be earmarked for my family's initiative? I escalated my privileges, citing a system-wide audit protocol, and accessed the account's payable ledger linked to the PR fund. I cross-referenced the inflow payments that corresponded with the outflow for the gift cards. A single vendor name appeared again and again: Norabelle Creative. The name hit me like a physical blow. Norabelle, a portmanteau of Nora and Belle, the French word for beautiful. It was the kind of cloying, self-indulgent name my sister would adore. It was a private joke hidden in plain sight, a signature of their arrogance. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I ran a public business registry search. Norabelle Creative was registered as a media and communications consultancy. The official address listed was not an office, but a P.O. box. A P.O. box. I recognized. It was the one my father had maintained for years for his personal business. The shell company was a direct link, but it still didn't explain the full loop. Why would Halcyon pay my father's company, only to have that money funneled back into Halcyon's own PR fund? It made no sense as a simple embezzlement scheme. It was too convoluted. There had to be another step, another layer to the deception. I started tracing the payments from Norabelle Creative outwards, and that's when I found the missing piece. Norabelle wasn't donating directly to Halcyon. Instead, after receiving payment from Halcyon for consulting services, it was making sizable charitable donations to a tiny, obscure nonprofit called the Children's Literacy Foundation of Northwick. This foundation then, in turn, would make a donation of a nearly identical amount back to the Halcyon Dynamics PR Fund, designated as a corporate sponsorship for an educational event, like a Coding for Kids workshop or a school tech fair. The whole sickening picture snapped into focus. It was a tax fraud scheme, elegant in its audacity. Halcyon would pay Norabelle Creative for services never rendered. My father would pocket a portion as profit, then donate the rest through the sham charity. The charity would act as a pass-through, donating the money back to Halcyon. Halcyon could then write off the initial payment to Norabelle as a business expense and claim a tax credit for the charitable donation it received, effectively getting a government subsidy for its own PR slush fund. The Merritt Family Initiative was their mechanism for tastefully spending the laundered money, rewarding themselves and their friends with corporate perks, all under the guise of community goodwill. The final piece of the puzzle was connecting the card activations directly to a person. I had the anomalous transactions in the lobby. I had the device ID that had redeemed them. Now I needed a name. Citing a potential security breach involving unauthorized building access, I submitted a formal request to IT for the guest Wi-Fi connection logs for the past 6 months, cross-referencing the device ID from the card activations. The result came back in less than an hour. The device ID was registered to a single user who had connected to the guest network on 5 separate occasions. The registered guest name, Nora M., the employee who had signed her in for the guest pass, Ava Merritt. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I had never signed Nora into this building. Then I saw the date of her last visit, 3 weeks ago. It was the day I had been in all-day off-site training. She had used my name. It was also, I realized with a jolt, the same day the final interviews were being held for a new position in the marketing department, a position I had heard whispers about but knew nothing of the details. Nora had been here, in my building, using my name as a key, interviewing for a job at my company. She wasn't just an accomplice in my parents' financial crimes. She was trying to infiltrate my life, to plant herself at the very center of my new, independent world. The rage I felt was pure and white-hot, but my hands remained steady. Emotion was a liability. Data was a weapon. I spent the next hour synthesizing my findings. I created a simple, clear flowchart, a box for Halcyon Dynamics, a box for Norabel Creative, a box for the sham charity. Arrows showed the flow of money, from invoice to donation to tax credit to gift card. I highlighted the recurring IP address and the guest Wi-Fi log with Nora's name on it. I printed everything in crisp black and white, the pages cool and heavy in my hand. It was a perfect, self-contained story of fraud, conspiracy, and familial betrayal. I clipped the pages together, a single staple piercing the top left corner. It felt like closing a wound, a final, decisive stitch. Then, I turned to my email. I composed a new message to Rowan Kincaid. The subject line was deliberately neutral. Risk analysis summary. The body of the email was even more concise. Rowan. During a familiarization audit of the PerkPath system, I identified a pattern of transactions related to an external sponsorship fund that suggests a potential conflict of interest. The scheme appears to involve a peripheral vendor and a charitable foundation to leverage tax incentives improperly. More pressingly, the vendor is directly linked to the family of a candidate in the final stages of hiring for a marketing position. I have compiled the preliminary data. Please advise on next steps. Ava Merritt, Analyst. Data Integrity and Compliance. I attached the encrypted case file. I read the message one last time. It was perfect. It was not the email of a wrong daughter. It was the report of a competent analyst, identifying a clear and present danger to the company. I hit send. The response from Rowan Kincaid did not come in the form of an email. It came in the form of silence. For 2 weeks, my report on the Merritt Family Initiative vanished into the digital ether. There were no follow-up questions, no meetings scheduled, no indication that my carefully compiled flowchart of familial fraud had caused so much as a ripple. Outwardly, my relationship with my director remained unchanged. He would give me assignments with his usual economy of words, his sharp eyes assessing my work with an unreadable expression. Yet, something had shifted between us. There was a new current in the silence, an unspoken acknowledgement. He had my report. He knew, and he was waiting. I understood. A quiet, internal investigation was one thing. A public accusation involving a new hire was another. Rowan was a strategist. He wouldn't move until the pieces were perfectly aligned on the board. So I worked, channeling my simmering rage into the cold, clean logic of my job. I built fraud detection algorithms. I audited expense reports with surgical precision. I learned the intricate systems of Halcyon Dynamics, turning myself into an expert on the very machinery I planned to use against my family. I was sharpening my knives. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the official announcement landed in every employee's inbox. It was a company-wide email from Human Resources, cheerfully welcoming a new addition to the team. Subject: Welcoming Nora Merritt, Brand Community Coordinator. I read the words, and my blood ran cold. Not with surprise, but with a grim sense of inevitability. So, the trap was being set. Rowan hadn't stopped the hiring. He was letting the fox into the henhouse. Nora's arrival later that week was a masterclass in performance art. I was returning from lunch when I saw her, standing in the center of the vast stone lobby as if she were on a red carpet. She was holding a large bouquet of white lilies, and her smile was a high-wattage beacon, charming the security guards and receptionists into a state of benign adoration. She was dressed in a chic, cream-colored pantsuit, looking every bit the dynamic creative professional Halcyon's marketing department would want to project. She wasn't starting a job. She was making a grand entrance. She spotted me as I stepped through the turnstiles, and her smile widened. She glided towards me, the scent of her expensive perfume preceding her. "There she is," she said, her voice bright and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She gave me a theatrical air kiss. "Congrats. little sister. On getting here before I did, you warmed the place up for me." The condescension was so thick I could taste it. The implication was clear. My quiet, data-driven job was merely the opening act for her, the true star. I gave her a small, tight smile. "Welcome to Halcyon, Nora." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the family group chat, a message from our mother, accompanied by a string of celebratory emojis. "My two merit girls, finally under one roof. I am so incredibly proud. The future is bright." I stared at the message, at the cheerful, oblivious lie it represented. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, 1,000 sharp-edged replies forming in my mind. Instead, I typed a single response. "Okay." I hit send, then turned the phone over and placed it face down on my desk. The unread messages from my father and a gushing Nora left to die in the dark. My eyes returned to the audit spreadsheet on my screen, its neat columns and cold numbers a comforting balm. That was the real world. That was the truth. The introductory meeting for Nora was held the following day in a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. The marketing team was completely captivated. Nora was brilliant in these settings, exuding a confident charm that made her vague, buzzword-laden ideas sound like revolutionary insights. She talked about synergy and brand actualization and creating authentic narratives. I sat in a chair against the wall, an observer from the compliance department, my presence a standard but unspoken requirement for meetings involving new vendors or initiatives. Rowan sat a few chairs down from me, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. He looked like he was simply making an appearance. I knew better. "My very first project," Nora announced, her voice filled with passion, "is something I'm calling Europe at Your Desk. It's a series of micro-events and digital experiences that will bring the magic of European culture right here to our employees, celebrating our global reach." She clicked to a new slide. It was a mood board of aesthetic, Instagram-worthy photos, a croissant next to a laptop, a miniature Eiffel Tower on a desk, a bowl of pasta. It was vapid. It was also the perfect cover. "To ensure the highest level of authenticity for this campaign," she continued, beaming, "I've secured the services of an elite external consultant, a boutique firm with deep expertise in cultural curation. They're called Norabel Creative." She said the name without a flicker of hesitation. She was so insulated by her own privilege, so certain of her untouchability, that it never occurred to her that the name might be a red flag. In her world, rules were for other people, and details were for me to handle. A profound calm settled over me. This was the moment, not for the takedown, but for the first turn of the screw. I raised my hand. Nora's eyes found me, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face before being replaced by her professional smile. "Yes, Ava? A question from compliance?" Her tone was gently patronizing, as if I were a child asking about the rules of a game the adults were playing. "Yes," I said, my voice even and clear. "Just a point of clarification for our vendor records. Is the consulting firm you mentioned, Norabel Creative, related in any way to any external sponsorship organizations that also partner with Halcyon?" The question was a scalpel, disguised as a paperclip. It was a standard, boring procedural question, but I saw, in the fractional tightening of Nora's smile, that it had hit a nerve. Rowan did not move, but I could feel his attention sharpen. Nora let out a small, dismissive laugh. "Oh, no, nothing like that. They're a completely independent entity, very exclusive." She turned her attention back to the marketing VP at the head of the table, dismissing me and my question as a bureaucratic footnote. Now, as I was saying about the social media integration, she had lied, a direct, provable lie, spoken in a room full of witnesses. I didn't press the issue. I simply made a small note on my tablet. Across the room, I saw Rowan subtly shift his gaze to me. He held my eyes for no more than a second, and then he gave a nod so small, so infinitesimal, that anyone else would have missed it. It was not a nod of greeting, it was a command. "I have what I need. Proceed." I lowered my gaze back to my tablet, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I understood the strategy perfectly now. To expose a beautiful lie. You can't just shout the truth. That creates a messy, he said, she said conflict, one my family would be masters at spinning into a story of a jealous, resentful sister. No. To bring down a story as polished and perfect as Nora's, you have to do it slowly. You have to let the storyteller build their stage, hang their lights, and invite their audience. You have to let them get comfortable in their own fiction. And as I sat there, listening to my sister describe a fraudulent campaign funded by her fraudulent company, I knew that the story's beautiful, tragic ending had already been written. The moment wasn't now. I needed to let them set their own trap, and then, when the time was right, I would simply be there to watch them walk right into it. The week after Nora's introductory meeting was a study in controlled patience. My sister was a whirlwind of activity in the marketing department, her laughter echoing in the hallways, her calendar filling up with ideation sessions and synergy meetings. She was building her stage. I, in turn, was building my case. And I knew my next move couldn't be an attack. It had to be a process. It had to be unimpeachable. In the quiet of my department, I drafted a one-page proposal. The title was deliberately bland. Vendor Integrity Initiative, a transparency pilot program, citing recent trends in corporate governance and reputational risk management. I proposed a new layer of due diligence for all incoming third-party contractors. The core of the program was a mandatory beneficial ownership and affiliations check, designed to ensure that the company knew exactly who it was doing business with, right down to the ultimate individuals who profited. It was a solid, logical proposal that any competent director of compliance would approve. I scheduled 15 minutes on Rowan's calendar. I didn't mention Nora or Nora Bell. I spoke his language, the language of risk mitigation and protocol. It closes a potential loophole in our onboarding process, I concluded, sliding the paper across his desk. It protects the company from hidden conflicts of interest. Rowan read the document, his expression unchanging. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the text. Then he looked up at me. This is a sound initiative. Merit, proactive. He tapped the paper. I approve it. Let's pilot it immediately. We have a perfect test case with that new marketing vendor. Get the paperwork out to Norabel Creative by end of day. We can't release their initial project funding until your department signs off. He had given me the perfect weapon, corporate policy. I returned to my desk and drafted the email to Nora. I used a standard vendor onboarding template, attaching our newly minted KYC form, Know Your Customer. It was 3 pages of dense, inescapable questions. I requested articles of incorporation, a full list of corporate officers and stakeholders, and most importantly, a signed declaration of all ultimate beneficial owners. I added a custom field, as per my new pilot program. Please disclose any and all financial or advisory relationships with nonprofit organizations, charities, or community initiatives. I sent the email, copying Nora's new manager and the head of accounts payable. The trap was now official, a matter of public record within the company. Nora's response came less than an hour later, not via email, but on the company's internal chat, a medium she likely considered less formal and more dismissive. Nora M., this is a huge amount of paperwork for a simple consultancy contract. It's putting the whole Europe at your desk timeline at risk. Is all this really necessary? I smiled at my screen, a thin, humorless expression. I typed back my reply, keeping the tone light and helpful. Ava M. Hey Nora. Just standard procedure under a new vendor transparency program we're piloting. We all want to make sure everything is clean and above board for your big project launch, right? Accounts can't release the funds until it's done. The smiley face was a perfect, passive-aggressive touch. I had cornered her with the one thing she couldn't argue against, the appearance of propriety. To protest further would be to admit she had something to hide. Before I had sent the forms, I had embedded a tracker in the digital signature field of the PDF. It was a simple tool that would capture the IP address of the device used to provide the legally binding signature, It was time-stamped and admissible as evidence. 3 hours later, a notification popped up. The signed document had been returned. I opened the file. The forms were filled out with plausible, if vague, information. The owner of Norabel Creative was listed as a holding company, but the digital signature was from an individual, my father. I exported the signature's metadata. The IP address was logged. The trap had its first victim. I swiveled in my chair and sent a new, formal request to the IT security department. For a vendor integrity audit, please verify the geolocation and registered owner of the following IP address. The response was back in 20 minutes. The IP address was assigned to a residential account with a major internet service provider. The address of the account was 14 Juniper Court. The name on the account was my father's. I saved the IT report. The link was now irrefutable. My father, from his home computer, had signed a legal document on behalf of a company that was supposed to be an independent contractor, a company whose registered address matched the PMO box where he had sent a check just months earlier to fund the Merritt Family Initiative. I opened a new file, a formal conflict of interest report. I began to methodically populate it with the evidence: the KYC form, the IP address report, the original transaction logs from the gift cards. I laid out the entire narrative in cold, factual language. When I was done, I stared at the submit button that would send it directly to Rowan, the board, and the legal department, but I didn't click it. I saved the report as a draft, leaving its status in the system as pending review. The guillotine was built, but the rope was still in my hand. It wasn't time yet. I needed one more piece, something personal, something that came directly from Nora herself. I navigated back to the PerkPath system. With my administrative access, I created a new, single-use $10 gift card. In the back-end notes, invisible to the end user, I tagged it with a unique tracking code, Nora Pilot 01. I composed a new email to my sister. The subject line, a cheerful, "Welcome to the team." "Hey Nora," I wrote, "everyone in compliance is so excited to have you here. Wanted to send you a little welcome perk to help you get settled in. Enjoy a coffee on us." I attached the digital gift card and hit send. It was a perfectly normal gesture, an act of corporate goodwill. It was also bait. I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, a notification from my audit script flashed in the corner of my screen. The tagged card, Nora Pilot 01, had just been redeemed at the daily grind in the lobby. The total was well over $10. Nora had clearly used it as a partial payment for a larger order. I pulled up the full transaction record. The system, which encouraged employees to add notes for their expenses, had a field filled in. User note, Team Coffee Run, fuel for our big project, Nora M. But it was the other feature of the system that made my heart beat faster. To promote engagement. PerkPath allowed users to attach images to their transactions, a photo of the team, the meal, or the event. Nora, ever the marketing professional, had used it. There was an attachment. My eyes locked on the file name. Europe at Your Desk, Draft, JPG. With a steady hand, I clicked the link. The file began to download. She had done it. She had used a corporate asset that I gave her, in a transaction I could now trace from beginning to end, and attached evidence of the very project she was using a fraudulent company to promote. The loops were all closing, and Nora had just tied the final knot herself. The download completed in a fraction of a second. The image, Europe at Your Desk Draft, JPG, opened on my screen. It was exactly as banal as I'd expected. A digital mood board, a collage of stock photos showing cappuccinos, Vespas, and smiling, attractive people in Parisian-looking cafes. It was the kind of generic, soulless content Nora excelled at producing. For a brief, sinking moment, I thought the trail had gone cold. The attachment was just what it claimed to be. But a career in data integrity teaches you one thing. A file is never just a file. It's a container, a vessel carrying its own history. Instead of closing the image, I opened its properties. I navigated to the Details tab, the place where the file's metadata was stored. and there it was. Every digital photo carries an invisible fingerprint called EXIF data, a log of the settings, timestamps, and even the device used to create it. In this case, the image wasn't a photo from a camera, it was a screen capture, and the metadata, by default, included a field for user comments, which often auto-populated with the original file's location. My eyes locked onto the string of text. C/users, Noram/documents, personals, family finances, merit, family fund. XLSX. My breath hitched. The image wasn't just a mood board. It was a screenshot from a computer where Nora was logged in. A computer that contained a file called Merit Family Fund. The name was a ghost from my past. A name I had typed into my own private ledgers 1,000 times. Nora, in her haste and arrogance, had taken a screenshot for her project without closing the other, more sensitive windows on her desktop. She had inadvertently sent me a map. I went back to the image itself, my eyes scanning it with new, forensic intensity. I wasn't looking at the collage anymore. I was looking at the background, the digital space around the collage. The screenshot had captured her entire monitor, and there, in the bottom left corner, faint and partially obscured by the main image, was the reflection of another application window, caught in the glossy bezel of her monitor. It was a spreadsheet. My hands flew across the keyboard. I opened the image in a forensic analysis program, the kind we use to detect altered receipts and fraudulent invoices. I isolated the bottom left corner and began to apply filters. I sharpened the image, adjusted the contrast, and corrected the parallax distortion from the reflection. The blurry grid of cells began to resolve into something legible. First, the column headers appeared, ghostly white text on a dark green background. Source, destination, amount, notes. And then, the line item, the single row of text that stopped my heart. Source, Ava's Education Fund, Sub-Actee 7B, Destination, Nora, Europe. Experience, amount, $42,500,000. It was all there. Not an accusation, not a suspicion, but a fact, logged in their own private records. The money that had vanished, the emergencies that had funded Nora's grand tours, the source of my years of struggle, all neatly documented. But it was the final column, the notes field, that truly broke me. It was a short, simple sentence, a comment, presumably added by my mother. Notes. Ava is self-reliant. She won't need it. Use for Nora's discovery. I thought I would shatter. I thought a wave of grief and rage would finally break through the dam of my composure, and I would cry, or scream, or smash the monitor in front of me. But none of that happened. A profound, terrifying calm washed over me. The pain was so absolute, so clarifying, that it burned away everything else. It became fuel. I methodically took a new screenshot, this time of my own enhanced image. I drew a neat red box around the damning line of text. I saved it as Exhibit D Financial Misappropriation, PNG, and added it to my case file. The spreadsheet held one more secret. At the bottom of the reflected Excel window, I could just make out the names of the different tabs. The first was Family Fund. The second was labeled Rebate Halcyon. The name sent another jolt through me. They weren't just running a scheme. They were tracking its profitability. This spreadsheet wasn't just a family budget. It was a ledger for their entire criminal enterprise, linking the theft of my college fund directly to the tax fraud they were perpetrating against my employer. It was the final, perfect link in the chain, proving intent, method, and motive. Just as I was saving the final piece of evidence, my personal phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was the family group chat. A new message from Nora, bubbling with her signature, oblivious cheer. Coffee's on me today, team. Europe at your desk is about to be a huge hit. Feeling the good vibes. I looked at the message, at the cheerful little winking emoji, and I felt nothing but the cold, clean hum of the server racks behind me. The good vibes were about to end. I picked up my phone, I replied to her message with a single, simple character, a thumbs up emoji. Then I put the phone down. I turned back to my computer. I opened the pending review conflict of interest report. I attached the new exhibits, the EXIF data analysis, the enhanced screenshot of the spreadsheet, and a brief clinical summary of what they revealed. I changed the report's status from pending to finalized for escalation. I opened a new email to Rowan Kincaid. The subject line was the same as my case file. Case file 001. The body was short. Rowan. The final piece of evidence has been acquired. The conflict of interest is confirmed, and it's connected to a larger pattern of corporate and tax fraud. The file is complete. Ava. I hit send. The finality of the act was absolute. The trap was no longer being set. It had been sprung. Less than a minute later, my inbox chimed. A reply from Rowan. It was 4 words. Bring it to committee. The Risk and Control Committee convened on the 28th floor, in a conference room that felt less like a room and more like a suspended cube of glass. From this height, the city of Northwick was a silent, sprawling map of someone else's problems. Inside the cube, the problems were immediate and contained. A long black marble table reflected the grim, impassive faces of Halcyon Dynamics' inner circle, the chief financial officer, the general counsel, the head of global security, and Rowan Kincaid. At the head of the table sat Alistair Hemsley, the CEO, a man whose quiet demeanor did little to conceal the fact that he could end a career with a single, soft-spoken sentence. Nora was already there when Rowan and I arrived. She sat on the opposite side of the table, a guest in this high-stakes theater, looking radiant and only slightly nervous. She likely believed this was a final, formal green-lighting of her Europe at Your Desk project. She smiled at me, a tight, questioning expression, as if to ask why compliance was involved in her moment of triumph. I offered nothing in return. Taking my seat beside Rowan, I placed my laptop on the table and connected it to the room's main display. I was not a sister here. I was an analyst. "Let's begin," Hemsley said, his voice filling the silent room. "Ms. Merritt, Mr. Kincaid informs me you have a time-sensitive risk analysis to present." "I do, sir," I said, my own voice steady and clear. I looked directly at the CEO. My analysis began with a minor discrepancy noted in our employee benefit system, a $10 gift card. A flicker of confusion crossed a few faces. I brought up the first slide. It was a simple image of the gift card, its alphanumeric code highlighted in red. This card, issued as a graduation gift to me, was not funded by HR as an employee perk. It was funded by the Public Relations Department's external outreach budget, through a third-party entity called the Merritt Family Initiative. I clicked to the next slide, the flowchart I had meticulously prepared. The initiative, I discovered, was a pass-through entity. It was receiving funds that originated with a Halcyon vendor, a communications consultancy called Norabel Creative. Norabel would invoice Halcyon for services, then donate a significant portion of its revenue to a small charity. That charity, in turn, would donate the money back to Halcyon's PR fund, allowing the company to improperly claim a tax credit. The funds were then used to issue perks, like this gift card, under the guise of community sponsorship. I let the diagram of the money laundering loop hang on the screen for a moment. The CFO was leaning forward now, his eyes narrowed. Nora's smile had vanished. She was staring at the screen, a dawning horror on her face. "A clean, if brazen, tax fraud scheme," the general counsel murmured, making a note. "But a fireable offense, not a committee-level crisis. What's the connection, Ms. Merritt?" "The connection is the vendor," I said, clicking to the next slide. It showed the KYC form for Norabel Creative. The ultimate beneficial owner declaration was signed by my father. I brought up the next slide. The IT security report. The digital signature on this legally binding document originated from the IP address registered to my family's home. A low murmur went through the room. Nora had gone rigid in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief. She looked from the screen to me, her eyes wide. Furthermore, I continued, my voice a clinical monotone, the entire scheme appears to be linked to personal financial matters. The same network that laundered corporate funds was also used to manage the misappropriation of private funds. This was it. I clicked to the final, damning slide. The enhanced screenshot of the spreadsheet reflected in Nora's monitor. The red box around the line item glowed like a fresh wound on the massive screen. Source: Ava's Education Fund. Destination: Nora Europe Experience. Notes: Ava is self-reliant. She won't need it. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. I had laid my family's soul bare on a corporate presentation screen. Nora found her voice first. It was a choked whisper, filled with a desperate, uncomprehending fury. She looked at me, not as a colleague, but as a sister, the one she had always known how to manage, how to dismiss. "Ava, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is this?" I turned my head and met her gaze for the first time. My expression was calm, my resolve like a sheet of ice. "I'm doing my job, Nora," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the marble table. "And I'm protecting the company that I actually earned my way into." The general counsel, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, cleared her throat. Seizing the opening, she turned her full attention to Nora, her tone shifting from analytical to prosecutorial. "Ms. Merritt," she said, addressing Nora, "let's return to the vendor, Nora Bell Creative. In your introductory meeting, you stated that this was a completely independent entity. Was that a truthful statement?" Nora was trapped. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, for an escape. I mean, it's a consultancy. My father provides some advice," she stammered, the words dissolving into incoherence. "Does he own it, Ms. Merritt? Does he control its finances? Did he, in fact, sign this legal declaration on its behalf?" Vance pressed, her questions like a series of sharp jabs. Nora didn't answer. Her gaze drifted past Vance, through the plate glass wall of the conference room, out in the waiting area. Seated on a plush leather sofa were our parents. They had arrived early, no doubt expecting to be brought in to celebrate Nora's new project. My mother was beaming, smoothing the lapels of my father's jacket. They looked like a photograph from our hallway. Perfect, proud, and completely oblivious. Nora's desperate stare was a silent scream for rescue. Alistair Hemsley, the CEO, raised a hand, and Vance fell silent. "I believe we have a sufficient basis to proceed," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We seem to have the contractor's representative waiting. Perhaps we should invite them in." He looked at his assistant. "Please, ask the representatives from Nora Bell Creative to join us." The door opened. My parents stood up, their faces wreathed in expectant smiles. They walked into the room, and the smiles froze, then melted from their faces as they took in the scene, the silent committee, the damning evidence on the screen, their two daughters on opposite sides of a corporate execution. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her face instantly pale and drawn. My father looked as though he had been physically struck. He found his voice first, a weak, placating tone that had never failed him before. He looked at Hemsley, a man he had likely met at charity functions, a man he considered a peer. "Alistair, there must be some misunderstanding," he began. "The only thing I misunderstand, sir," Hemsley said, his voice dangerously soft, "is why you thought you could use my company as your personal bank and tax shelter." My father's composure finally broke. His eyes fell on the spreadsheet on the screen, on the line about my education fund. His gaze flitted to me, and for a second, I saw not a con man, but a cornered, pathetic father. He turned back to the CEO, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of surrender. We were just trying to help our daughter shine," he said, his voice cracking. "Nora has so much potential. We were just trying to give her a spotlight." It was their entire philosophy, their life's creed, laid bare in one desperate, self-pitying sentence. For the entire meeting, Rowan Kincaid had been silent, a statue of quiet observation. Now, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. He didn't look at my father. He addressed the room, but his words were aimed like a rifle. "The company's funds," Rowan said, his voice low and resonant, "are not a spotlight." Rowan's 4 words were a summons. The committee was an execution. What came next was a public funeral. It was scheduled not in a private boardroom, but in the company's main auditorium, a space usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls and product launches. Halcyon Dynamics, under the swift and decisive leadership of Alistair Hemsley, was not going to bury this scandal. It was going to dissect it, live on stage, as a testament to its own robust immune system. It was turning my family's disgrace into a corporate case study, a masterclass in transparency, and I was the star witness. The room was filled with the company's senior management. The air was thick with a tense, nervous energy. My family was there, seated in the front row, an honor that was, in fact, a form of punishment. They had been strongly encouraged to attend. They were flanked by corporate security, a subtle but unmistakable sign that they were no longer guests, but subjects of the proceedings. Nora sat between them, her face pale and drawn, the vibrant charm she had exuded just days ago completely extinguished. They looked like a family in a courtroom, awaiting a verdict that had already been decided. I stood on the stage, slightly behind and to the side of the main podium, with Rowan and the other committee members. We were a united front of corporate governance. In my hand, held loosely at my side, was the $10 gift card. It felt warm for my touch, a small, humble talisman of a war that was about to end. Alistair Hemsley stepped to the podium. The room fell silent. He began to speak, his voice calm and authoritative, weaving a narrative of strength and integrity. He spoke of Halcyon's unwavering commitment to ethical conduct. He announced the immediate implementation of a new, company-wide vendor integrity program, my pilot program, now fast-tracked into law. It was a brilliant piece of corporate jujitsu, using the momentum of the scandal to launch a reform that made the company look stronger. As the first successful test of this new protocol, Hemsley announced, his voice ringing with conviction, we have identified a conflict of interest involving a new third-party contractor. The vendor in question, Norabel Creative, was found to be in breach of our standards for beneficial ownership and financial transparency. As a result, Halcyon Dynamics has officially terminated any and all existing or future business with this entity, effective immediately. He didn't need to say their names. The collective gaze of 100 executives shifted to the front row, a wave of judgment that was almost a physical force. My father flinched. My mother seemed to shrink in her seat. But Nora was not done. She was, and always had been, a performer. She stood up, her movement shaky but determined. A gasp rippled through the auditorium. "Mr. Hemsley," she said, her voice trembling but carrying in the silent room. "If I may, I just want to say..." All eyes were on her now. The spotlight she had always craved turned into an interrogator's beam. All of this, it was an unintentional mistake, a misunderstanding of complex corporate procedures. I was just trying to be innovative, to bring a new energy to my project. My intentions were good. It was her final performance, the role of the passionate, misunderstood artist, crushed by the gears of the corporate machine. She was appealing for sympathy, trying to rewrite the ending of her own story. Hemsley did not respond. He simply turned his head slightly and looked at me. It was my cue. I stepped forward to the podium. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I looked directly at my sister. "An unintentional mistake?" I asked, my voice as clear and cold as the glass walls of the committee room. "The legal vendor forms for Norabel Creative, the ones you claimed were an independent entity, were digitally signed from our family home. The IT logs confirmed the exact time and IP address." I paused, letting the first blow land. Nora swayed slightly, her hand gripping the back of the chair in front of her. A misunderstanding of procedure? I continued. The image file you attached to your coffee expense, Europe at your desk draft, JPG, was a screen capture. Its hidden EXIF data contained the file path to a personal spreadsheet on your computer, a spreadsheet named Merit Family Fund. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the room. A woman in the third row, a senior manager I recognized, let out a soft, involuntary gasp. I held up the small plastic card in my hand, the $10 insult that had started it all. But the most profound misunderstanding, I said, my eyes locked on Nora's, was detailed in that spreadsheet. It explained the funding for your Europe experience, the grand tour you took while I worked my way through school. The money came from a transfer, from a line item labeled Ava's Education Fund. Silence, a deep, profound, and absolute silence. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world shattering into a million pieces. Nora crumpled back into her seat, as if her strings had been cut. She looked at me, her face a ruin of disbelief and betrayal. She didn't see an analyst. She saw the sister she had always considered a footnote, and she finally understood that the footnote had just written the final chapter. Hemsley stepped back to the microphone. His voice was now devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of pure, cold business. Effective immediately, Nora Merritt's probationary employment with Halcyon Dynamics is terminated for gross misconduct and material misrepresentation. He paused, delivering the final, brutal blow. Furthermore, all documentation related to the Children's Literacy Foundation of Northwick and its financial relationship with Nora Bell Creative will be turned over to the Office of the District Attorney for further investigation. Criminal charges. The word hung in the air. Unspoken but understood by everyone. This wasn't just a firing. It was a referral for prosecution. My parents recoiled, as if from a physical blow. Their faces ashen. They looked like old, faded photographs of themselves. The vibrant colors of their confidence and social standing bleached away in the harsh, fluorescent light. The perfect family portrait, the one they had curated for decades, had just been set on fire in front of a live audience. I leaned forward to the microphone one last time. My voice was quiet, but every microphone in the room picked it up. "Thank you," I said, looking out at the silent crowd. For the graduation gift, it opened the right door. I stepped back from the podium. As the room began to stir with hushed, shocked whispers, I felt a light pressure on my shoulder. It was Rowan. The touch was so slight, so brief. It was a private signal in a public space. "An ending for you," he murmured, his voice for my ears alone. "A beginning for the company." I nodded, a small, sharp movement. The company's legal aides were already moving towards my family, their expressions grim. I didn't watch. My part in this was over. I walked off the stage to where a junior lawyer was standing with a clear, plastic evidence box. She held it open for me. I looked down one last time at the $10 gift card in my hand, the memento of a petty humiliation that had become the key to a kingdom, the most valuable $10 I would ever possess. I dropped it into the box. It landed with a soft, plastic click. I placed the lid on the box myself, sealing it shut. The sound was crisp, final. It was the sound of a curtain falling. I walked out of the auditorium alone. The buzz of 100 shocked conversations was a physical presence behind me, a wave of energy that I simply stepped through, leaving it to break on the shores of corporate gossip. No one approached me. They watched from a distance, their expressions a mixture of awe, fear, and a dawning, grudging respect. I was no longer just Ava Merritt, the quiet analyst from the 32nd floor. I was something else now, an object of institutional legend, the woman who had surgically dismantled her own family on the main stage. I felt their eyes on my back, but for the first time in my life, the feeling of being watched didn't make me want to shrink. It made me feel solid. My path took me through the main lobby, the cavern of polished stone where Nora had made her grand entrance just weeks before. High on the wall, Two maintenance workers were on a hydraulic lift, methodically peeling a giant vinyl poster from the marble. It was the flagship advertisement for Europe at your desk, a vibrant, cheerful image of a Vespa parked in front of a stylized Colosseum. They weren't tearing it down in anger. They were removing it with the quiet, indifferent efficiency of a scheduled task. The fiction was being erased, not with a bang, but with the soft, sticky sound of adhesive giving way, a ghost of an idea, already fading from memory. The automatic glass doors slid open, and I stepped out of the climate-controlled stillness of the Halcyon Tower and into the chaos of the city. The Northwick sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air was cool and crisp, and the sounds of traffic and life rushed in to fill the silence I had been living in for the past hour. I pulled my personal phone from my pocket. The screen was dark, but when I woke it, the lock screen was a chaotic collage of notifications from the family group chat. Nora, how could you do this to us? Mom, we gave you everything. Dad, you've ruined us. For what? Nora, you were always jealous. Always. The messages flashed and piled up, a frantic, digital screaming match. For years, a single notification from that group could send a spike of anxiety through my chest, a summons to play my part, to soothe an ego, to absorb a blame. Now, I watched the screen light up with their frantic, dying rage, and I felt nothing. It was like watching a storm through soundproof glass. Their words were just pixels on a screen. Data points in a failed system. I didn't block them. I didn't delete the chat. I simply pressed the power button, plunging the screen back into darkness. The sky, reflected on the black glass, was a vast, empty page. I slid the phone into my coat pocket and walked towards the elevator bank for the employee parking garage. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its stainless steel doors sliding open. As I stepped across the threshold, a voice, small and broken, called out my name from behind me. Ava. It was Nora. I didn't need to see her to know the look on her face, the shattered disbelief, the confusion of a star whose sky has just gone dark. For a moment, every instinct I had been trained in since birth screamed at me to turn around, to comfort, to explain, to manage her feelings, to reassume my role as the cool head who could absorb the family's pain. It would have been so easy to step back, to let the doors close on an empty car, to be drawn back into the wreckage. I did not turn. I kept my eyes fixed on my own reflection in the polished steel of the closing doors. The doors slid shut, sealing me inside. Her single, desperate word was cut off, leaving only silence. In the reflection, my face was calm, impassive. The lines of stress that had taken up permanent residence around my eyes seemed to have faded. There was no triumph in my expression, no joy, no anger. There was only a profound and unshakable stillness, the stillness of a thing that has finally been put right. My hand went to the inside pocket of my jacket. I didn't carry the actual gift card anymore. That was evidence, property of the corporation. But I had kept a high-resolution scan of it, a small, laminated copy of the back of the card, with its long string of alphanumeric characters. I could feel the sharp corners of the plastic through the fabric. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder, the origin point, the first piece of data that confirmed a truth I had always known but had never been able to prove. It was the beginning of my own justice. For my entire life, I had been seeking recognition. I had worked, I had strived, I had excelled, all in the quiet, desperate hope that one day, my parents, my sister, would turn to me and finally see me, that they would acknowledge my effort, my sacrifice, my worth. I saw now that I had been seeking validation from a bankrupt source. Waiting for them to recognize me was a form of permission, and they would never have granted it. Today, I hadn't sought their recognition. I had created my own. I had defined my own value, not with achievements they could praise or ignore, but with an action they could never undo. I looked at my reflection again as the elevator descended. A final thought formed in my mind, a quiet declaration spoken only to the woman in the reflection. the only person whose opinion now mattered. I am no longer the cheap gift. The elevator chimed again, a soft, pleasant sound. The doors slid open, revealing the familiar, brightly lit concrete of my parking level, my floor, my world, my work. I stepped out. Thank you for listening to this story. I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. I'd love to hear from you and share our thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.